Moving on to our first keynote presentation of the day. It's given by Robin Smith. Hi, Robin. Who's the head of cyber and information security at Aston Martin. Sadly, he hasn't brought me a model to take away.
It's in the post.
In the post, excellent. And he's going to talk about protecting frontier technology in the age of the mega hack. Robin, great to see you. And this is an example of how cyber gets into every aspect of our life to car manufacturing. Robin.
Well, good morning, everyone. I have been banned from offering discounts, so don't ask me for 5% off. I get in terrible trouble when I do that. It's a pleasure to be here in the week that Toyota have endured a massive disruption to their supply chain. You'll have seen over the weekend their supply chain was disrupted and they lost all of the plants, 13,000 units, following state-sponsored cybercriminality. So it's timely to be here, and I'm going to pick up on a couple of threads discussed by the previous speakers, and I want to focus on really mindset and method that Aston Martin are pursuing. So this is maybe a less technical perspective, but picking up on issues around ransomware resilience, picking up on intelligence-driven planning. I'd like to take you through how Aston Martin are designing its strategy to deal with the surge in cybercriminality. There it is, the Aston Martin Victor. Lovely machine, a one-off. I don't drive that, unfortunately. I've got a nice one on order. But the fact is that these are our boundary. You know, for the previous speaker talking about the end of the traditional network, well, that Aston Martin Victor contains 55 CPUs, multi-million lines of code, a lot of personal information, and we all know the people that buy those, they may be in the audience, I don't know, but the people that buy those are high-profile individuals. They expect security, they expect protection. If we imagine you procure that car for, I guess, £500,000, and then it's stolen off your driveway because we haven't secured the vehicle properly. So Aston Martin has got a real perspective that this is our new boundary. It goes global, it's mobile, it's subject to change, it's subject to update, so it's absolutely essential that our approach, our mindset, and our thinking around security takes into account, the fluidity of our boundary and the changing nature of the cyber threat. I don't want to pat myself on the back, but I did actually predict a surge in cybercriminality in 2019. I think the point wasn't really to kind of make any greater point than how well resourced were we to deal with an expansion in cybercriminality. And after 20 years working for 5 different law enforcement agencies, one of the key issues that the police do very well is to consider we've got a finite amount of resources, but we have a seemingly infinite amount of crime. So the police, for their failings and for their faults, they're not perfect, are really problem-orientated. Now, the post here was really not to kind of, forecast particular numbers. It was to say, if we've only got a finite amount of resources, are we doing the very best to tackle cybercriminality and changes in that demand profile? And obviously in the last 24 months we've seen changes in the demand profile. And you're going to hear lots of figures today. The context here is not the specific increases of 168%. The context here is evidence. There is evidence that we've seen a massive surge in cybercrime over the last 24 months, and there is evidence that the COVID pandemic, we all know, but it's good to kind of get the kind of actual statistics that we are facing a greater amount of demand, new threats, new impacts on the organisation, and how are we responding to that? And this is a key question Aston Martin wanted to address. Having worked in law enforcement, it's very evident that it's quite a lucrative living being a cyber criminal. If I had a different moral compass or no moral compass, it might be something we'd entertain. I don't have the skills, unfortunately. What's on the screen here is the fact that cybercriminality is hugely lucrative, aside from state-sponsored attacks that we're seeing in the last week. $1.5 trillion a year. The NCSC predict that to go up to $6 trillion a year by 2025, which is higher than drug trafficking, people trafficking. So this is an industry. We know it's an industry, and we know that we've gone through the industrialization of cybercrime. So we know that cybercriminals have gone through that expansion. But is it right that our own approaches have gone through a revision, an update, a modernisation? And Aston Martin was in a position where it hadn't been doing this, thinking about the sheer scale of the threat. So on appointment a year ago, one of the things that I brought to my new team was an approach to intelligence-led cyber planning. There's an awful lot of information out there, an awful lot of data, but I didn't see much evidence of processing. I didn't see much evidence of synthesis. And going back to my experience in law enforcement, the UK Police Service uses something called the National Intelligence Model, which is a formal way of aggregating intelligence and directing resources via something called tasking coordination. So when you've got an infinite amount of crime and a limited amount of resources, tasking coordination gives you a really clear-sighted way of focusing on priorities. Now, I'm not suggesting we don't do that. What I'm suggesting is that there is a leaner, more agile way of using the intelligence to deliver key actions within the organisation. For Aston Martin, we start to link in with Orpheus Cyber, we start to link in with ESET, you've probably seen the reviews yourself. And the point really isn't about the sources of this intelligence. The point here is to note the changes in the scale of the threat. Ransomware sort of is still uppermost at our mind, but the ESET report was saying that in certain sectors, ransomware threats were being displaced by info stealers. And that spoke to an issue that the nature of the threat is dynamic, changing, it's always adapting, and it's based around this idea of malicious innovation. We'll come back to that. And the organisation simply wasn't keeping up to date with the techniques and tactics used by cyber criminals. We were just about mastering how we were dealing with ransomware, and then suddenly info stealers come through. We were just about working out our cyber incident response protocol when state-sponsored disruption to supply chain was happening. So it was revealing a mindset and a difference in mindset between cyber criminals and the organisation. And the global threat is well articulated. These are the Sophos kind of headlines from the end of last year, and they come out of date as quickly as they come through. The point really is to kind of articulate the material impact on the organisation. There's obviously a lot of headlines around about the cost of a cyber incident remediation. I'm always a bit reluctant to kind of believe 1.85 million, that's a high figure. But the subsequent point to that figure is, well, how long are the board going to endure paying for ransomware payouts or dealing with cyber incidents of that cost? I work for an organisation that has to make and sell. Your own organisations have got a bottom line. Now that we're at the top table, I'm not so sure we can just simply say that's how much it costs. And this goes back to our idea around intelligence management, resource planning, and directing only to those priorities for the organisation. And we know the material impact. It isn't just the bottom line, although that's a pretty hefty concern for Lawrence Stroll, our CEO. There are reputational damage. Aston Martin is a global brand. We've had the Bond film, we've got the Formula One. We trade significantly on the prestige and the brand reputation. They're also great cars, obviously. But the fact is that every organisation that's affected by a major disruption, you only have to reflect on how people are going to consider Toyota. Am I going to buy a Toyota over the next couple of months? What could have possibly installed on the vehicle? These brand issues become very kind of reflective of an approach to cybersecurity that maybe lags behind the cyber criminals. So I've talked about the surge. What I want to really get to is how this affected our mindset and approach. How am I doing for time? Okay. All right. So as we considered the environment in which we operate, as we considered our approach to intelligence management, which was be problem orientated, we then wanted to kind of tap in to where there's been successes and to think about what's the nature of the threat. And here, if you've seen the kind of disruptive operations by Europol, great successes with the Emotet raid a year ago. The most revealing thing about this Emotet raid was the asymmetry in the nature of the threat. So we're all working in highly corporate environments. We're working with fantastic tech providers. The Emotet group were working on a laptop with a server, with a media setup in a very small office. So actually there's an asymmetry in the way that we're dealing with cyber operations that needs to be reflected in our tactics and approaches to improve our cyber incident response. And there have been other successes, and these successes reveal that we can start to understand our mindset can mirror the malicious innovation of cyber criminals. Criminality as a service has been, in place for over a decade. We've had RIA there, the handsome fellow. We've had the Sopra Steria supply chain disruption, all of which reveals how adaptive and how agile cybercriminality is, and all of which reveals how we lag behind in terms of technological innovation, in terms of our tactics, and in terms of our mindset. So Aston Martin, we wanted to address the fact that these cybercriminals are very innovative when it comes to emerging technology. So how do we now change our mindset to ensure that our design is positive, is intelligence-based, tackles any opportunities emerging for cybercriminals, and protects the organisation on an ongoing basis? It's been mentioned already. One of the key dimensions to this is the adoption of new technology. We need to focus on how cybercriminals are going to exploit that with new criminality. We saw drone offences in UK airspace in the last 2 years. We've seen artificial intelligence plagues, all of which reveal kind of the fact that the threat profile changes on a regular basis. And if we are not adaptive and if we're not agile, we won't be able to meet that threat. So this isn't some sort of sci-fi, bad robot kind of Armageddon being predicted. This is the reality of what the previous speaker was talking about. New technology, new exploitations. We mustn't lag behind in terms of our ability to defend against them. And we do have successes. We see changes in the cybercrime market. We see that ransomware peaks and troughs, and we see that new tactics emerge, and we are able to respond, and we are able to protect the organisation against it. And for Aston Martin, one of the ways that we were able to do that was to be focused on what our current and changing risk profile was. And it taps into a number of things that have been mentioned already this morning. Mesh architecture, making sure that the organisation has a positive design around security, layered security, all that good hygiene that's required that you know about that isn't always enforced within the organisation. Now, I'm not going to speak to Aston Martin's design, but I worked in the nuclear sector prior to working for Aston Martin, and you have to believe that the nuclear sector makes its absolute daily mission security, vigilance, protection. And there's something in the mindset of every single person that walks around the nuclear organisations where they protect the organisation to the highest degree, to the point that I once let someone tailgate me through a door, and I got lectured by the receptionist for about 15 minutes, rightly I might add, by the way. But vigilance is a value within nuclear, and that is something we're bringing into Aston Martin to say that whilst it's a different environment, it's absolutely essential that all the technology, all the process is built upon an understanding of security as a key part of the mission. So for us, Aston Martin employees talk about security as part of safety. We're making the vehicles safe by making them secure. We're protecting personal information. We're also protecting the organisation. When you've worked for organisations of a comparable nature, you drink the Kool-Aid when you join Aston Martin. You think, oh, this is really cool, and you're really proud to work there. And we tap into that psychological dimension to say, part of your mission then is to make sure we sustain the prestige of the organisation, not just via design, but via day-to-day action. We've heard about kind of the perimeter being a perimeter being dead, and we focus much more on identity-first security planning. We make sure that we have proper administration, joiners, movers, and leavers. We make sure there is a focus on the individual and their rights, and we make sure we do regular auditing to drive through standards. Now, obviously, we've all been working kind of in a hybrid environment. We're having a mass return to the office, which is extremely unpopular with some of our staff. But we actually continue to work through the pandemic with production taking place in the UK and overseas to make sure we continue to hit our orders. And that presented problems in itself, which is there is an expectation that the organisation would respond to the changes wrought by the pandemic. So that's something that we're thinking through currently. And we are extremely fortunate. Someone asked me the other day, how do you influence the board? We changed our board, and we got a couple of bulldogs in, and they are relentless in pursuing improvement, and they are relentless with their approach to security as part of the corporate mindset. So we're lucky. Lawrence Stroll is pretty aggressive around security, and rightly he should be. And we're also gone through the supply chain consolidation, particularly on the back of what's happened with Toyota. And needless to say, GDPR remains a big concern. I want to finish on this point, which is this approach, this method and this mindset really is about being reflexive and making sure our controls don't just stand still. We don't just deploy Darktrace. What we look at is how Darktrace is generating intelligence and insight to feed back into the system to make our security planning better. You know, we have a generous cybersecurity budget, but it's only going to go so far. You know, Toyota faced nation-state sponsored action. You know, even Aston Martin hasn't got enough money to kind of defend against that. So being problem-orientated, being lean, and making sure we use intelligence to define and derive and deliver problem resolution is the approach that we have taken going forward. And this is built on reflexive controls. And I'll finish with an example here, which is this is how we build intelligent design, positive design into all of our controls. We take it through a design stage where we simulate, test and improve, simulate, test and improve using knowledge management techniques. And what that delivers is a serious understanding of every dimension of a new product or process. So a car will go through this process, so will an access control policy. That leads us into a position of being focused on intelligence to deliver Aston Martin security for the next 5 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robin. Absolutely super. The points that I want you to think about from that presentation are the threat, its dynamic, and the response to the dynamic threat is not fit and forget. You have to treat your system like a patient, and you have to make sure all your programs are updated regularly. And finally, the other point I took from this was board responsibility. And that is absolutely vital in any organisation, that somebody owns the problem and directs people to conform to the problem and have good policy in place. Robin, will you be there for the break? You can approach Robin for questions during the next break. Thank you very much indeed.